Blood pooled on the hardwood, warm against my cheek, the copper tang filling my mouth. My shoulder hung useless, every breath sharp enough to cut. In the doorway stood my brother Matteo, arms folded, eyes unreadable, while Sophia's heavy boots retreated down the hall. He didn't kneel beside me. He didn't call for help. He just said it in a voice so calm it sounded rehearsed. "You should have signed the papers, Valeria." And then he was gone. I'm Captain Valeria Morales, U.S. Army Medical Corps, 38 years old. I've patched up soldiers in field hospitals under rocket fire. I've steadied my hands over torn arteries while helicopters thudded overhead. I've seen men bleed out in desert dust and still kept my voice even. But nothing in my career prepared me for my own brother watching me get beaten in my own home, his words slicing deeper than Sophia's fists ever could. That night had been quiet, too quiet, until the pounding started. Not the polite knock of a family visit, but the furious pounding of someone who believed they had the right to break their way in. When the doorframe splintered, Sophia's face was the first thing I saw, red with rage, sweat darkening the collar of her shirt. The second thing I saw was Matteo, half a step behind her, not looking at me, but scanning the apartment like he was already erasing himself from the scene. I knew why they were there. The week before, they'd brought over a glossy brochure for a 100-acre horse ranch outside Austin. "It's our dream," Matteo had said, the way kids talk about running away to join the circus. All we need, they claimed, was my signature on the loan as a guarantor. It was a $2 million mortgage, far beyond my means, and I'd said no. Not angrily, not dismissively, just no. Because I knew what would happen if their big plans collapsed. I couldn't be the one to lose my home, my career, my security clearance over someone else's gamble. Sophia didn't see it that way. In her mind, I was a traitor to family, to loyalty, to some unwritten code that demanded I sacrifice everything for them. Her hands were on me before I could step back, shoving me into the wall hard enough to rattle the framed flag above my desk. My training told me to stay calm, assess injuries, find an exit. My instincts told me to fight, but when my eyes found Matteo's, searching for the brother I'd grown up sharing hand-me-downs and secrets with, all I saw was a stranger. His sentence still hangs in the air for me even now. "You should have signed the papers." As if a line of ink could have erased what was happening in that moment, as if my refusal was the crime and the bruises blooming across my skin were just the inevitable punishment. I'd seen betrayal in combat zones before, quiet, efficient, and final. I never thought I'd see it in my own living room, delivered by the one person I thought would always cover my six. I wish I could say that night came out of nowhere, that the violence was some random storm I never saw forming. But the truth is, I'd been watching the clouds gather for years, quietly at first, like the way a room changes when the air gets too heavy before a thunderclap. Matteo and I grew up in a house where uniforms hung like second skins, and the smell of boot polish lingered in the hallway. Our father was Army, our mother a nurse who'd followed him from base to base. We learned early that discipline and loyalty weren't suggestions, they were orders. I wore those values like armor. Matteo, he wore them like a borrowed coat, something he could shrug off when it felt too tight. By the time I shipped out to my first deployment, Matteo had dropped out of college. He said it was temporary, just until he figured out what he really wanted. What followed were years of short-lived jobs, bartending, selling cars, running a boutique for a few months before it folded. I sent postcards from the Middle East. He sent photos from music festivals. We were different, but we were still siblings. At least I thought so. Then Sophia arrived. She was a former Marine, discharged early after a knee injury. All easy smiles and polished charm the first time we met at a barbecue. But underneath, I saw something else. The way her hand lingered too tightly on Matteo's arm when he laughed, the subtle corrections when he spoke, like she was editing him in real time. I'd been around enough soldiers to recognize control when I saw it. It rarely starts with shouting, it starts with shaping. Still, a year later, I stood beside Matteo as his best woman at a wedding in Austin that looked like a magazine spread. A live band, crystal centerpieces, the kind of champagne you don't buy on a budget. I smiled for photos, but inside, I couldn't stop thinking about the bills. Sophia's landscaping business was just breaking even. Matteo wasn't working. I knew they didn't have the savings for this. It wasn't long before the calls started, first for small amounts, then bigger. Just until the next contract comes through, Sophia would say. I'd told myself it was family, that this was what you did, but every time I said yes, I felt a little piece of that armor I'd carried since Fort Bragg start to crack. I didn't know it yet, but those cracks were how the storm would find its way in. It was a Tuesday night when they showed up. Mateo in a silk shirt I'd never seen before, Sophia in a tailored suit that didn't fit the woman who usually lived in work boots. They brought a bottle of wine so expensive it deserved its own security detail, the kind you don't open unless you're making a point. They settled in like it was a social call, but Sophia's eyes kept scanning my apartment, pausing on the medals in the shadow box above my desk. Mateo's smile was too bright, his laugh half a second too quick. Then Sophia reached into her leather briefcase and slid a glossy brochure across my coffee table. 100 acres in Texas, rolling pastures, a white-fenced arena, a barn that looked like it had been lifted from a movie set. This, Mateo said, tapping the page with a manicured finger, is our future. Sophia leaned in, her tone low and deliberate. All we need is your signature on the loan. With your record, the bank will approve it instantly. We're talking life-changing, Valeria. I didn't even have to read the fine print to know it was trouble. A $2 million mortgage, no steady income between them, and the kind of optimism that burns through money faster than fire through dry grass. I told them I'd think about it, which bought me exactly 24 hours before Sophia started texting reminders. The next morning, I walked into Lieutenant Colonel Delgado's office on base. He'd been my mentor since my first deployment, a man who could read a balance sheet as easily as a battlefield map. He skimmed the brochure, his jaw tightening. "Absolutely not," he said. "You sign this and you're tying your career and your security clearance to their financial disaster waiting to happen. Don't let family push you into a hole you can't climb out of." When I told Mateo and Sophia my answer that weekend, the air in my living room changed. Mateo's smile faltered, Sophia's did not. It sharpened, like she'd just marked me on a list. I couldn't see. She said nothing overt, just placed her glass down slowly, the base ringing against the wood. But the way she looked at me, steady, measuring, felt like a promise. Not the kind you keep, the kind you collect. Sophia didn't waste time pretending my no was the end of it. The messages started that night. Long, ranting texts about loyalty, about what family owes each other. She'd remind me of favors I never asked for, debts that existed only in her telling of the story. Between them came the calls, silent at first, then heavy with breathing, then her voice, low and controlled. "You're making a mistake you can't undo, Captain." Mateo's approach was softer, but no less cutting. He sent old photos, 2 kids at Fort Bragg wearing mismatched fatigues, grinning like the world couldn't touch us. Attached would be a line, "Guess we're not teammates anymore." Another time, a snapshot of us at my officer commissioning ceremony, his arm looped through mine with, "I was there for you. You can't do this for me?" I'd stare at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard, but I never sent the words I wanted to, about choice and boundaries and the difference between love and leverage. A week later, Sophia crossed a line. I was on shift at the base medical facility finishing a post-op chart when I heard raised voices in the corridor. 2 MPs had her cornered near the check-in desk. She was holding the same brochure, waving it like proof of my betrayal. Her voice carried, "She's family. She can't hide behind a uniform to ignore that." I didn't go out there. I just called the duty officer and let procedure handle it. Still, the stares from my colleagues followed me for days afterward. Then came the truck. A black pickup, the kind Sophia drove, started parking half a block from my apartment. Some nights it idled there, lights off. Other times it just sat, engine cold like a marker left on my street. I'd come home from late shifts and feel that prickle between my shoulder blades, the one I'd learned to trust in war zones. I began keeping a log. Screenshots, call records, photos of the truck with timestamps. I printed copies and handed them to Sergeant First Class Navarro, our base security NCO. He didn't flinch, just said, "We'll keep eyes out, and Captain, don't be alone when you don't have to." It was sound advice. But even with the Army watching my 6, I could feel the circle tightening. Sophia wasn't going to disappear. She was waiting for the moment she thought I'd break. It was just past 9 when my phone lit up with Mateo's name. I almost let it ring out, but Something in my gut told me to answer. His voice was wrong, too calm, almost rehearsed. Sophia's upset. She wants to talk to you. No details, no apology, just a statement like he was reading a weather report. Before I could respond, he hung up. 15 minutes later, the pounding started. Not a knock, a full flat-palmed assault on my door that made the hinges groan. Sophia's voice tore through the wood, thick with fury. "Open the damn door, Valeria!" I backed toward the kitchen, phone in hand, thumb over the number for the MPs, but I hesitated. Part of me still believed that if I called them now, there'd be no going back. Not with Mateo. That moment of pause cost me everything. The frame splintered under her shoulder, the door swinging wide. She was on me before I could step back. The smell of whiskey sharp in the air. The first hit came fast, an open-handed shove that sent my head snapping to the side, then a fist to my cheek and another to my shoulder, driving me back into the wall so hard a picture frame rattled to the floor. Pain flared white in my vision. And there he was, Mateo, standing in the doorway, arms crossed, his weight on one hip like this was just an inconvenience in his night. His voice was steady, almost bored. "You should have signed the papers. I wanted to ask him how we got here, from braiding each other's hair in the back of Dad's Jeep to watching me bleed in my own living room. But Sophia wasn't finished. She swept her arm across the coffee table, sending my laptop crashing to the floor, then leaned in close enough that I could see the burst blood vessels in her eyes. "Next time," she hissed, "you'll think twice." Then she was gone. Mateo with her. The doorframe hung jagged, the air thick with the smell of sweat and broken wood. I pressed my hand to my cheek and felt the swelling start under my skin. It took me nearly 10 minutes to get to the gate at the edge of the base, every step sending a jolt through my shoulder. The MPs didn't ask questions they didn't have to. I was in uniform, bleeding, and I had a name. And for the first time in this whole mess, it wasn't mine they'd be writing down. The MPs drove me straight to the base hospital, fluorescent lights, antiseptic air, the cold press of a nurse's hands on my cheek. X-rays confirmed a fractured zygomatic bone, deep bruising along my shoulder. I'd seen worse in combat zones, but those wounds had never come from my own bloodline. By morning, CID had taken over. Special Agent Torres introduced himself in a voice that didn't waste words. "We're treating this as both a federal assault case and a potential military jurisdiction matter," he said, flipping open a notepad. His questions were precise, and I answered each one with the same clipped clarity I'd used in field reports. But it was the way he listened, like every pause meant something that told me he'd been doing this a long time. 2 days later, Mateo called. No apology, no acknowledgement of the bruises he'd seen with his own eyes. Just, "Valeria, drop the charges. You're making this worse for the family. People talk. Dad doesn't need the shame." I didn't raise my voice, but I didn't bend either. I'm not the one who brought shame into this family. With my JAG attorney, Captain Vargas, we built the case piece by piece. Hallway security footage showing Sophia forcing my door, the string of threatening texts, and then the gem Torres found, an old police report from Oklahoma where Sophia had been accused of assaulting a former girlfriend. The charges had been dropped back then. Not this time. The trial split in 2 tracks, federal court for the assault and a military review board for conduct on a federal installation. Sophia came in wearing a pressed suit, hair neatly trimmed, her medals pinned to her lapel. She played the part well, soft-spoken, eyes cast down, the wounded veteran who let her temper get the better of her. I'd braced myself for the worst, that Mateo would hold to his story, keep her hands clean in the eyes of the jury. But on the 3rd day, something shifted. He took the stand, voice trembling at first, then stronger. He described the pounding on my door, the moment it gave way, the first blow Sophia threw. Every word he spoke drove the air out of the room. When he finished, there was no mistaking it. The jury was looking at me differently, not as a sister fueling a feud, but as someone who had survived exactly what I'd said I had. And Sophia, for the first time since this began, stopped smiling. Sophia's sentence came down on a rainy Thursday afternoon. 6 years in federal prison, followed by a lifetime restraining order. The judge's voice was steady but final, like a gavel hitting stone. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. The weight I'd carried for months wasn't gone, but it had shifted enough for me to stand a little straighter. The physical healing was measured in x-rays and range of motion charts. The rest, the sleepless nights, the jolts of panic at sudden noises, took longer. The Army assigned me a counselor specializing in combat trauma, but it was the Warrior Sisters group that steadied me. Women in uniform, each with her own story of betrayal behind closed doors. We didn't need to explain the intersection of service and survival. We already knew. Mateo's divorce filing came quietly, without fanfare. He left me a voicemail one morning. I'm out. Weeks later, he asked if I'd meet him for coffee. The conversation was halting at first, full of unspoken landmines, but it was a start. He was in therapy now, learning to unpick the years Sophia had woven into him. I wasn't ready to forgive, not fully, but I could see the brother I remembered trying to surface again. I requested a transfer away from my old quarters and into a training role, teaching combat medics how to keep their heads in chaos. The classroom was cleaner than the field, but I kept the scenarios gritty, real. I told them that boundaries weren't just about patient care, they were survival, whether you were in a war zone or your own living room. Some nights I'd walk the perimeter of the training grounds after the last cadet left, the Texas wind carrying the faint smell of dust and diesel. I'd think about the invisible lines we all draw and how easily they can be crossed when we're taught that family excuses anything. The Army had taught me discipline. Sophia had taught me the cost of letting someone else define your loyalty. And somewhere between those lessons, I learned that my life, my safety, wasn't negotiable. Not for blood, not for history, not for anyone. The first time I stood at a podium after everything, the room was filled with uniforms, some pressed and decorated, others faded from years of service. It was a conference on domestic violence and financial exploitation in the military community, and my name was printed neatly on the program beneath the words, guest speaker. I told my story without softening the edges, not to sensationalize, but because the truth didn't need embellishment. I spoke about how easily loyalty can be weaponized, how family ties can become handcuffs if you're not careful. Heads nodded, some eyes dropped to the floor. They understood. A month later, a letter arrived from a federal correctional facility. Sophia's handwriting was the same, sharp, controlled. She wrote that she was sorry, that prison had given her perspective. I read it once, twice, then set it aside. Her words didn't sting, they didn't heal. My recovery had never depended on her remorse. Mateo came to that same conference the following year. He sat in the back, hands folded in his lap, and listened. We didn't talk much afterward, just a hug, brief but steady. Sometimes reconciliation isn't loud, it's simply the absence of harm. If there's one thing I've carried from all of this, it's that blood doesn't make you safe, and history doesn't make you obligated. In the military, we drill every possible threat scenario, we prepare for the enemy outside the wire, but no one tells you how to armor yourself against someone who knows your childhood nickname, who sat beside you at the dinner table, who calls you family. So I tell them now, draw your boundaries in ink, not pencil. Seek your allies on your base, in your unit, in the law. Don't let love, or the memory of it, talk you into risking your safety or your future. We train to defend a nation, but sometimes the truest battle is defending yourself from the people you thought you'd never have to fight. And when you win that battle, not with rage, but with resolve, you carry a different kind of honor, one no one can take from you.